Oh, welcome everyone to Sports Copy. Vaishak and I are here introducing a new series called On Field Stories. Here we plan to talk about, talk with people who are directly involved in sports. So today we have a special guest here with us, Arka Bhattacharya. He did his engineering with us from NIT Trichy. But then after being an engineer, he decided to follow his real passion of sports and journalism. So he went on to do masters in journalism from Asian College of Journalism, and then worked as a correspondent with Economic Times, and later on with Scroll, before moving into sports journalism. And now he's working as a lead consultant at World One Sports. So welcome, Arka, and thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks. It's good catching up with you guys.
So, Arka, just to start off, having such a career change into journalism from engineering, what's your advice for people who feel a misfit after pursuing an engineering degree?
My advice is don't pursue it, but to be very honest, the grass is always green on the other side. I think it's a case of whether you like doing what you like doing, whether you can wake up 30 mornings in a row and say, this is what I want to do. It's all about that. And if you are following your passion and, then you should have no complaints. What I have noticed is that in the real world, and this is something that, I've seen very often, the money that you get is inversely proportional to the amount of passion you have in your job. Basically, the more passion you have with respect to your job, don't expect anything. But the good thing is that now even an industry like sport is getting structure. Let's say there are changes that are coming, more regulations are coming in. It's not very unfragmented like it was, let's say, 5 years ago. So, I mean, sports management jobs are still very rare, still don't pay a lot. They're not even year round, most cases, because most leagues are not 12-month organizations, unlike the US. Or unlike the in Europe, where where the Manchester United or Barcelona's are 12-month organizations, full proper companies functioning like that. We still don't work like that here. But yes, good news for people wanting to follow their passion is that there is some light at the end of the tunnel with regards to sport, at least.
So as you ask about sports, I just wanted to ask one thing as well. You switched into journalism, but can you tell, what and how you got into sports journalism? Like, what is the main difference when you switched from, general topics where you were doing journalism about the normal politics and economics and everything and social issues, and then you suddenly moved on to sports?
Yeah. So I was involved in, initially I was doing business journalism, and then I did, I moved to sports because essentially that's where my interest, lies. And when you look at general journalism, it's more about, it's on a variety of issues. Like I was doing city journalism in Bangalore, and that involved covering civic issues, what's going on in the city. Covering beats like transportation, technology, what are the things that are changing in the city? That's pretty interesting in itself. Sport is obviously a different kettle of fish. I took it up because I wanted to watch live sport. Like I wanted a job which enabled me to watch live sport without me, being overtly financially burdened by it. That is really the carrot in sports journalism, that you get to watch so much live sport, meet so many people, and that is essential. That is really what it comes down to. And I think I was my objective that way. It also gave me a very deeper understanding into India's sporting ecosystem as to what we see on the ground, what we see in the papers. Is it the same? How are things moving at the smallest levels? What are the moving parts from someone making it from the absolute bottom to the topmost level? So the shift nowadays is tough because I, for example, had to pursue a degree to switch to journalism, and that's true of any profession, because except unless you're doing a load of those online courses, you have to basically get a degree. Otherwise, in India especially, it's very tough. switching to a field that you like to do without a degree. People always be like, what's your capability, or have you undergone any training in this field? So essentially, that is the only reason I had to do my degree. Otherwise, I used to write on journalism, like used to write articles even before I got into journalism. But it wasn't on a scale that I, is not the same as being a full-time journalist. Being a part-time one is not the same as being a full-time one. Yeah.
True. Yes, completely agree with you there. Yes, I've seen that. So anyways, now you're currently working with the Young Legends League. So could you throw some light into what your work there is and what your experience working with them?
Sure. I'll try to keep it short. So, I mean, FIFA mandates that the most advanced ecosystems, if you look at Brazil or England or Germany or any place, the one factor that is consistent is the number of games that they play at between the ages of 4 to 15, right? So when India was preparing for the Under-17 World Cup, what we noticed is that India's team that was playing at home for the first time ever in a World Cup did not have any pictures from the time they were 6, they were 7, because they didn't take up the sport at that time. They took up the sport at 11. Someone used to play badminton and then they switched to football at 11, right? So they took up the sport really late, and that didn't really help their cause. But otherwise, there was a guy called Tom Bayer who during the 2018 World Cup did this study, where he, looked at 12 players like Neymar, Modric, Ronaldo, Messi, what their career progressions. The one common factor in all of their careers is that they started very early, 2, 3, 4. Di Maria, for example, he signed for his first club. I mean, sign as in you get what I mean. He registered for his first club when he was 4. He switched to another club for a bag of footballs when he was 7. So the buying club had to give the selling club a bag of footballs, and they got Di Maria in return, right? Messi, for example, played for one of Rosario's oldest clubs, youth clubs, before he moved to Newell's Old Boys, and Barcelona had 13 tapped him up. So he was already like an established name that Barcelona called him for a trial when he was 13. So you can imagine how advanced those ecosystems are. So in 2017, I was still friends with the guys who started it, and I was a passive supporter. Obviously, now I've come on to work on full time. So we obviously brainstormed, and we saw that India, big gap was that nobody between the age of 4 and 15 was playing those 35, 40, 45 games per season. That was a huge gap in the ecosystem. The Young Lions League, what it serves to do is that it serves to close that gap. In the first year, the Young Lions League ran for 33 game weeks plus a cup competition, making it the longest age group in India, longest league in India across any age group, across any gender, across any category. Okay, otherwise, most leagues here in India run as tournaments. There are 4-day tournaments, 5-day tournaments. People just namesake, just do it, conduct 2 matches and finished. That's not a league. That's a tournament, right? Even at the highest level, the I-League is 18 matches. The ISL is 18 matches. There is a huge gap there, which is why when India goes to play your big World Cup qualifiers or big your Asian Cup, what they do is they can't last 90 minutes because they're not used to the rigor of playing 27, 30 matches, 35 matches. They don't do it at any age group. Forget the juniors also don't do it. So YLL was India's first structured 3-tiered baby league. The baby league concept is very common in, let's say, Uruguay, where your Suarez, Cavani, all of these guys are product of the baby league. They have their own baby league federation, right? So we started India's first 3-tiered baby league, where we said the big gap in our ecosystem is game time, and this will serve to plug game time. This will serve to plug the gap. It is a mistake that any coaching, anything can compensate for this lack of game time. You can't, because science teaches us if you do a thing 10,000 times, you get really good at it, right? And that the footballer's technical ability basically saturates by the time he's 17, 18. From then, he's only learning tactical stuff. He's only learning how to be versatile, how to play in different positions, when to make his runs, when to hold back, when to tackle. His technical ability, I mean, what the basics, he can't go and learn the basics at 11, 12. That's a big problem. The YLL serves to which is why we started with this under 6, under 8, under 10. And we do it in communities. We could have very easily done it in a Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore. But we do it in communities where we know they take it seriously, where football is a matter of life and death, where they are invested for a period of 10 years. And the problem with also most grassroots programs in India is that it's just a photo op. Someone comes from PSG, coach comes from PSG, takes a photo and then goes off. That's not to me. The real grassroots is where you are getting bang for your buck. You're spending penny and you can see where the penny is going and what it's being used for. What is the realization that I'm getting out of this 1 rupee that I'm putting in, right? So last year in the YLL, we had India's 3 big academies come to the YLL. They said no other under 13 team, is of this technical ability. They are higher than any of their compatriots. And they took 7 people. They took 7 kids who were given full scholarship, full funding, full education till the time they are 18. So it's remarkable start for us. We also got published, I think, a lot of publications, but yeah, that's not our point. The point is to produce like really good players who can compete at not just like a national level, but at a continental level. That's the whole plan.
I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. Since you explained everything, can you give a status update on where are these academies set and where are these clubs right now?
These are not academies. Let me clarify. These are baby leagues, right? So baby leagues have one of our centers is Champa in Mizoram, which is on the India-Myanmar border, right? So it's 12 hours from the state capital, Aizawl. Right, it's a very tough journey, obviously, because the last flight is at Aizawl and then you have to catch a sumo. It's only 184 kilometers between Aizawl and Champai, but the road is so bad that it takes 12 hours, right? But in that remote ecosystem, for them, football is everything. I mean, for them, they take football very seriously, right? So I'm just diverting a great story from that. Just want to mention this. One guy from our under 13s played against Manchester United this summer, where he played against Reliance Next Gen Cup. He was selected for Bengaluru FC. He played for Bengaluru FC under 15 against Manchester United and Southampton under 15s. That's a great story. Him coming from that remote place to here, I mean, remarkable. But yeah, the 2 baby leagues we've started currently are in Champai and in Bishnupur. Bishnupur is in Manipur. Champai is in Mizoram. In Bishnupur, we have a setup called the Taida Academy, which acts like the next step of the pathway. So after our kids graduate from the baby league, they go on to play in the Taida Academy, where they can play the under 13, 15, 18 age group, and then they're open for the ISL and I League clubs to come and scout. You come, you pick up kids, and I mean, what more validation is there for a program if your kids are selected from an ISL or an I League club? So. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I mean, so you have worked with right now working with Young Legends, but I know that you have also worked before with an ISL club, FC Goa. So I wanted to, can you share the experience? What is at the top level in India at football?
So the top level in India is changing. Before, most auditions in football was more gut feel. Like, I mean, there weren't very structured programs in place. There was a lot of off the cuff decisions, like why we buying this player, is there any rationale? There wasn't. But with the advent of clubs like FC Goa, scouting is taken very seriously. For example, they have FC Goa is one of the most comprehensive youth programs ever. They have 7 teams, including the senior team. They have an under 20s, they have a reserves, they have an 18, 16, 14, and they have a women's team, right? Under that, they also have a programs for kids younger. So essentially, the one club there in Goa is providing a pathway right from the age of 6 to 21, 22, till whatever age you're playing in the club. So FC Goa, Bengaluru FC, these clubs are bringing structure into Indian football. These clubs are again work 12 months a year. They have activities in the off season also. The problem with the Indian league system is that the off season is way longer than the leagues. The league runs for your 4 months, 5 months max. And then your off season is for 6, 7 months. But then these organizations don't stop working because they have a huge database of players to select foreign players from. They have they run the permutation combinations in their heads. They use analytics. They use like GPS softwares and all that. They do load tests, gate tests. So, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, when you're going into a very structured setup in Indian football, you're not learning a lot because you're already, I mean, there's a lot of structure already. Like, you're just plugging in one hole. But if you're going into, let's say, an I-League club or something, you get to learn a lot more because there you might do everything. You might do everything from starting scouting to basically carrying goalposts to basically making dinner for the players. You could do anything. So, yeah, I mean, ISL clubs, like I said, they're very structured. They're very good at what they do. They have a proper organizational hierarchy and all that. And everything is done like it's what do you say? They're at least trying to emulate their European counterparts in professionalism.
We, Maishak and myself are coming from Kerala, and in Kerala, football is, I would say, in somewhat crazy or somewhat bigger, more popular than cricket in some areas at least.
No, it's huge. It's huge. Like there's no denying it. Like Kerala is huge for football. Like I mean, it's crazy. I would say.
Yeah.
It's bigger than cricket. I'd say it's bigger than cricket there.
At least definitely in some parts, especially in North Kerala, it definitely football
Malappuram, for example, is just batshit crazy about. Like we just saw another club from there get funding recently from a Dubai-based company. So yeah, in Kerala, I would say. Sorry, go on. You were asking a question.
No, that's why I just wanted to know about your intake or experience, or do you know how in Kerala the football is, or what's the development there?
Yeah. So Kerala football is very unique. Like I said, I mean, one of the other things about a football program is that before, what used to happen is that the federation AIFF used to conduct programs, and then they used to try and implement it countrywide. The problem with doing that in India is that every state in itself is a country. It has different culture, it has different everything. So you can't have a uniform rule, right? You can't have the same set of rules you have for a Mizoram or a Manipur, that you have a Kerala, that you have for Kashmir. You can't. You have to basically make a tailor-made solution for this thing. For example, you can't have the same solution for a UP that you have for Kerala, because Kerala is already, in terms of an ecosystem, is 30 years ahead of UP, right? So UP will take 30 years to get to the level of football that Kerala is at. And then Kerala is 30 years behind Australia, right? So if you're starting from UP, then you're 60 years behind Australia. So I am more interested in every state as a tailor-made solution. If I look at Kerala, for the longest time didn't have a platform, right? After Kerala Police won the Durand Cup, it should have been the springboard for greater things, but it didn't take place. Because your public sector units, they couldn't pass licensing tests, right? So which is why they shut down. They shut down their football team. They still exist in small ways, right? But they're not top tier outfits anymore. They don't, let's say, spend crores of rupees to field a team in the top tier league, right? After Viva Computers, so basically Viva Computers was a big brand in Kerala. I think they were the owners of Viva Kerala. After they shut down their football team, there was no football team in Kerala till 2013-14. Then what happened is that most of your guys will take up, state will take up the sport if there is a club in the state which is making the sport popular. Why Bengal's football culture is so high is that because you have an East Bengal and a Mohun Bagan who are playing top tier sport. That is an aspiration for any kid that wants to play the sport in Kerala, right? Or in Bengal, that is. So until the Kerala Blasters started, right? You know the craze was there. The seventh scene had actually overtaken the main football scene, right? Because the seventh scene is paying 50,000 rupees per game, 30,000 rupees. Why would I, as a footballer, leave that comfort and, try and struggle in the I-League or the second division, for, let's say, a sum of 2 lakh rupees per year or 3 lakh rupees per year when I'm getting 50,000, 30,000 per match in the seventh scene, right? Because it's such a thriving scene. So Kerala didn't have a outlet till Kerala Blasters came in. They came in from Kochi, which is not the hub of football. Obviously, it's not Malappuram, right? But still, the support that Kerala Blasters gets, it's crazy. It's insane, right? It has more supporters. It has more followers on Instagram than, say, Brighton and Hove or FC Augsburg. Kerala Blasters has more followers than like some Bundesliga Premier League clubs, right? So the craze for that team is there. The craze for sport is there. But the problem is that Kerala football is not producing that level of talent anymore. Like you have one or two players who are in the senior team, but you don't have any more players, right? But now what's happened is that there is another team from the Kozhikode area which has entered the I-League system, Gokulam Kerala. Gokulam Kerala, if you guys know, is owned by the Gokulam Gopalan Group, which has your malls and which also owns Flowers TV in Kerala, right? So it's a huge group again. And because it's Kozhikode, it's more strategically positioned closer to the footballing hub of Kerala, where the culture lies. So there again, providing a fantastic pathway for local youth to come and play, and which is very important. You have to understand that today a club based in Manipur will prefer to give a chance, a pathway to Manipur youth, because that is their ultimate service. And that is how the fans also recognize that this is our club, right? If you're giving a chance to local youth. So you always needed a Kerala club to give a chance to Kerala youth. And now you have two of those with Luka Soccer Club, which is based in Malappuram, getting funding from Dubai based company. So now you have three decently funded Kerala clubs. So which is a great springboard, I feel, for Kerala football. But then what Kerala has to do, it has to increase its state league's length, right? It has to try and the talent that drains away to the sevens system, it has to try and get those guys back. Of course, it's never going to be as lucrative for them unless or until those guys join the ISL. Because a simple math, right? If I am playing 10 or 15 sevens game per season, I am making 10.5 lakhs. That is the money I can only make at, let's say, a top tier I-League club or an ISL outfit. So, I mean, the sevens for an average footballer is obviously going to be more lucrative. But if you plan to play for India, if you want like a good contract, which, more than 50 lakh, 40 lakh, whatever, then you need to get into the ISL system. But till then, the talent has to remain in the system. It should not go to the sevens scene.
Good you said about passion. Another passionate area in India for football is Northeast, and you were talking about places there and football there. And I think you also have first-hand experience working there, right? Earlier. So, can you touch upon how it was there working there and how the beautiful stadiums of Northeast are?
Yeah, so I mean, what do I tell you guys? Like, Northeast is some of the most beautiful stadiums in the entire country, not just the country, the world. I feel, right? I mean, they're just crazy. Like there are some stadiums where you feel, oh no, I have to go and play, and there are some stadiums where you see, I'm just content to sit here and just sit here all day, even if there's no games happening. Just sit here and take in the view. Some of them have mountains overlooking it, so people are standing on top of the mountains and seeing the game, right? The passion for the game is high. The talent there is crazy. Like they're super technical players, right? So for example, Punjab produces a lot of physical players, right? Kerala used to produce a lot of skill players, but now like those guys play so many games among themselves, right? That their technique is like next level, bro. So which is why like the stadiums, one of my favorite stadiums is the Aizawl Stadium. Aizawl has a lot of beautiful stadiums. You have a stadium at a place called Nongstoin in Meghalaya, which is again, I think it went viral a couple of years ago for being like a bombshell of a stadium. Like, so I don't easily, I think I can count on my fingers at least 20, 30 stadiums, across the Northeast where it's a pleasure to play and watch football, It's just that you can't, like, they're not up to league standards. They're not up to FIFA standards, the pitches. And there are no huge clubs willing to invest a lot of money in there. Otherwise, I think for anybody who's just, doing some football pilgrimage or football tourism, for them, it's perfect. I think for them, like the Northeast is like in India, at least it's the golden, it's the golden goose for football, I'd say.
Yeah, it was very nice to hear from you. There is a tourism reason to visit the Northeast. There's a lot of good places to see, as well as a footballing reason now as well. So that's good. Yeah. But you have toured one other place, which I'm interested to talk about, is Germany. You have actually gone to the Westfalenstadion and seen Dortmund play Leverkusen last season. And I think you also went to the Rhein-Energie-Stadion to see Köln play Schalke. Can you just share the stadium experience in Germany?
Yeah, so actually been to a lot more stadiums in Germany, but my favorite, like I said, of them all was the Rhein-Energie Stadion in Cologne, because it's a small stadium. It's very compact, right? The one thing about watching football in India is that a lot of the stadiums have tracks around them. They have athletic tracks, so the gap between like the field and the spectators where they're sitting is too much. Sometimes it's too far away, right? Germany has football only stadiums, right? And it has some of the biggest in the world. For example, I think it has more than 50,000 plus seaters, which is crazy. You come to think about it. Cologne is one of them. Stadium at its fullest can hold about 52,000 people, I think. Take care. So when their chant, rings out, Mehr stehen so dire, basically my heart will go on, Thijs, or my heart is for FC Cologne. It's crazy because everyone is on their feet. They're taking their scarves and they're waving it out in this thing. There is so much passion. There's so much energy, and like it's like you can't hear yourself in the stadium at full this thing, right? And I've always said this, having watched football in a lot of places across Europe and India, there is no atmosphere that really, matches the German atmosphere. Like in the world, I mean, obviously a lot of us are used to watching Premier League, but the atmosphere the atmosphere at a Bournemouth can't be compared to the one at Cologne, because when I went there, they were last. They were on the verge of being relegated and they were facing Schalke, who was second, right? Despite that, the crowd was in full voice. They didn't let up, and for 90 minutes, they were very vocal and you couldn't just hear yourself. And because the stadium is so small, because the football is just below you, it's happening. You're almost like you're standing there and watching, like right pitch side. Like that is the feeling of being in one of those stadiums. So, I mean, Dortmund again, another great atmosphere. I'd say when the yellow wall comes out with their tifos and all that, I mean, there is no matching them because they make some crazy tifos. The yellow wall, especially. Their choreography is very good. Then the Alliance is also very good. The Commerce Bank, like, I mean, you could basically take any of these stadiums and at any point of time, they're likely to be nice. Right. Obviously, Corona put a stop to that. But I mean, for like, just speaking of football culture, I think Germany has to be the number one in the world in terms of the football culture, in terms of how they imbibe it, the pre-match rituals, them starting to drink beer like 4 hours before the game and then doing like a beer walk to the main stadium. It's a part of their heritage, is part of the culture. They do it. They're willing to shell out money for football. It's not like in India where you go and ask somebody, you say come and attend the match. If they're suddenly asking you, can you get me a free ticket? Can you get me a free jersey? Nothing like that. There, a Cologne fan is happy to shell out money for his favorite team. And that is how a football club sustains, basically, which is why even though Germany doesn't have your big investors due to its 50+1 rule, the public are so invested in their teams that they are sustainable, and they're not on the brink of financial insolvency like a lot of the Spanish or English counterparts, or French for that matter.
To wind things up, I just want to know about one question about Indian football. So what we all dream about, seeing India playing football World Cup. So something which we have been looking forward to. What do you think? What is your view on when do you think India will be, or Indian football team will be able to make it to the World Cup?
I think we should be making this a bit more general. Let's say just not about football, also about like athletes going to Olympics and bagging a gold. That is also a dream for most of the people who follow sports. So I think I'll break it down. I won't give a date because I mean any date that I give, I mean I'm not an astrologer, so I can't give a date, right? But I'm just going to give you the context so that you guys understand how big a journey it is, right? So if we take the continents wise, I think Asia still on an average lags behind most of the continents when it comes to football, right? Obviously the number one continent for just footballing talent per capita is Europe, followed by South America. South America unfortunately fallen behind Europe, because Europe has more professionalism. That's it, right? So Europe, South America, then I'd say Africa. Okay. Africa, then I would say North America, and then Australia, or Australia and North America. However, and then comes Asia. So Asia, barring the top 5-6 teams,
none of them are that great, you know. In fact, if you look at Asia, Japan and South Korea and Iran and Saudi Arabia more or less monopolized the World Cup spots, right? No other team is able to get in also. Okay? Despite them investing heavily in football, China, right? Number one example, despite them investing heavily in football, they have not been able to this thing, right? And football is a continuous process, because if you're evolving, if India is evolving in its practices, so is the West, so is Europe, so is Southern America. By the time you evolve to where they are, they've evolved to some other stage, right? So having laid out this priority order of continents in terms of their footballing strength, when it comes to Asia, the Southeast Asia zone is the weakest in the entire Asian continent. So remember, we are in the weakest zone in the weakest continent, right? So Southeast Asia, the SAARC nations, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, these guys, like, I mean, we are often happy winning the South Asian Cup, but to be honest, these guys are not really competition, right? Just give you an example. Afghanistan moved to the West Asian West Asian Federation because they weren't very happy with the level of quality that was on offer. Like, we weren't very happy with the level of competition that was on offer. They said, if we join West Asia, if we face the likes of Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, maybe we'll improve, right? So in Asia, the priority order is Japan, China, your West Asian bloc. Then you have your that is East Asian, Japan, China. Then you have West Asian countries. The tier 1 of West Asian countries like Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia. Then you have the tier 2 of West Asian countries. You have Jordan, you have Lebanon. You have a lot of these guys who can just come play ball any day, and then you have apart from them you have the ASEAN countries. ASEAN, when I say Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, that stretch of the belt. Then comes your South Asian countries. Then comes your India, Bangladesh. So you see how long a journey it is. So I really can't put a time on this. India qualified for the Asian Cup in 2019. That was only the 4th time in our history we've qualified. And that too because the Asian Cup expanded from 16 countries to 24 countries, right? And out of these 24 countries, only 4 make it to the World Cup. So our first aim should be to make it to the Asian Cup on a regular basis. The Asian Cup is the equivalent of the Euros, right? So make it to the Asian Cup on a regular basis. Make it every 4 years. 1 year, try and make it to the quarterfinals. Next, try and make it to semi-finals. If you're making those semi-finals, you're one of the 4 best teams in Asia. Then and only then will you have a chance of making it to the World Cup. Olympics is even more tougher because you have only 16 countries.
I just wanted to get the question a bit more broader. So I was not talking about if you are involved in other sports as well, like the athletic events. Like how far is the process for the athletic facilities to improve and for the athletes to come up in?
Yeah, sure. So I've covered athletics also as a major beat of mine, and there again, I mean, first we got to stop, hyping up these small achievements. So, I mean, just an example. So there was this sprinter called Hima Das in India, right? She won an under 20 gold medal, but then the best competitors under 20 are already participating in the senior competition. So it's not a big deal, right? And her best time was in the 200 meters was 400 meters was some 50 seconds something, and whereas she was almost 2 seconds off the world championship time, right? So I mean, in terms of the sprint events, we are very far off the world mark. I mean, in terms of 100, 200, we are not even close. Like there's no competition, right? In the Olympic final, 8 out of the 8 people who participate in the Olympic final, usually 6 to 7 of them have gone under 10 seconds. Their best lifetime is under 10 seconds, right? India's national record in the 100 meters men's stands at 10 seconds, 10.3 seconds, right? So the national record is only, I think, more, way higher than the people who are just competing in the final. Forget the medal, right? So, I mean, that Then, so sprint events, forget. The only place where India might stand a chance is the relays, right? Because countries of smaller populations, they can't often produce like a huge batch of runners, right? You need to have, not to win a relay competition, you need to have 4 good runners, right? So India has the strength in numbers there, which is why they might do something in relays, which is why they qualify for the Olympic relays finals also. Even though no individual qualifies for sprint finals, India still managed to qualify for the relay finals. Also, mixed relays is also India has an advantage because India has good, decent men and women sprinters also, which is why mixed relays also. In terms of other athletic events, our best events are, let's say, the throwing events, right? Our best athlete is a javelin thrower, Neeraj Chopra, who's at least closer to the world standard. His best is 88 meters, whereas the world record leaders are throwing around 90, 91 regularly, 92, 93, right? But at least there is some scope for him that he can improve further, and he can, he was the only one to, let's say, participate in the season-ending Diamond League finals. The Diamond League is your equivalent of your Champions League in football. In athletics, it's the Diamond League. So Neeraj Chopra was the only one to participate, only Indian to participate in the finals of Diamond League, where he came, I think, 8th, which is not bad at all. Finishing 8th on a worldwide level is not bad at all. But then again, it just shows you how far we have to go. Sprint events, like I said, we are far off. Throwing events, we still might stand a chance, like shot put, javelin, all of that. Then you have, apart from this, you have the mixed events. You have the pentathlon, decathlon. That again, you need to be like a superb athlete. You need to be like completely overall well-rounded in everything in order to win one of those, right? So there again, we are very far off the world standards. The main problem with athletics is the same as football, right? So why the US is so good at athletics is because they have something called the NCAA collegiate system, right? They have something for schools. They have the NCAA collegiate system. So by the time the athlete is 21, 22, 23, and they also I can get into an Ivy League school on a sports quota, right? By the time the athlete is 22, 23, he's received so much high level competition, right? So that he or she has to push himself, right? So why now a lot of athletes go to the US is because of the simply was a competition format, right? Why I'm telling you the competition is important is because, let me just give you an example, right? If Vaishak is today running 10.4, he's the fastest guy in the country. The other guys are running 11, 11.5, 12, right? Vaishak's not going to improve any further because he's winning his races very easily, right? Only when there is strength in depth, when there is a depth in the field that, oh, someone else is coming. And that happens in the US and China and Japan a lot, right? Olympic champions have been eliminated in the trials for the next Olympics. That's how cutthroat it is in these countries, right? Table tennis, for example, this has happened. The defending table tennis champion has been knocked out in the trials, right? A defending high jump Olympic gold medal champion has not made it through the US trials, thus ruling him out of the Olympics, right? So that's how cutthroat it is there. And here you're talking about, even if you get like a world-class sprinter, he's not going to have enough competition to push him, right? Which is why there in schools, you have like this athletic meets and all, right? And you have 6-year-olds pushing other 6-year-olds, right? And like generally the tendency at that age is to just run faster than the other guy, right? So you don't have that quality field, quality in depth that I'm talking about, right? Just having 1 or 2 won't help. Unless you have 5 other guys to push those 2 guys, you're not going to get anywhere competition wise. And for athletics, it's the same as football, right? Because most athletes, when they come at 17, 18, they come into a national camp, right? Right. Your grassroots athletes coach is just saying, ha, bhag. You just run as fast as you can. That's it, right? But there in the national camp, the Ukrainian or the foreign coach, whoever it is checking your stride, saying, boss, you're running only in the wrong way. Your technique is only wrong. Okay, you have to put this foot in front of the other foot. You have to, this should be a stride length. This should be the gap between your legs. Your legs should not be positioned here. Your body should not be positioned there. If they have to make 20 fundamental changes in your technique, by the time you're 18, 19, 20, you're finished. You're not getting anywhere. Simple. It's as simple as that, right? So this has to start, the process has to start much earlier for us to even make a dent at the world level. It has to be structured. Like there has to be a rationale behind every program that you run, right? It just can't be like, just see the bhag, and you can't just develop an athlete by just asking him to throw 100 times a day or run 100 times a day. It doesn't work like that. Like it's simply very unscientific. I think that is what has to change first here. Like why you're doing it, what competitions are you conducting, and what is the rationale behind conducting this competition, right? If you are conducting a 5-a-side game in football, or if you are conducting a one-legged race in athletics, why is that, right? There is a reason why people outside do it, right? Why are you doing what you're doing, right? Why are you, let's say, in the name of coaching, getting a very expensive foreign coach, asking him to come take photos with your players and go back? Like in terms of your realization of money, is that helping you, or are you just throwing away money? That is a question I think we have to ask. Instead, we're just more focused on hosting big events. Let's host the World Cup. Let's host the Olympics. Let's host that. Let's host this. Abhinav Bindra said it. I didn't say it. Abhinav Bindra said India should not host the Olympics till India has a capability to win 40 medals. Right? And I 100% agree. Sports in essentiality is a bottom-up activity, right? Where you build from the grassroots and then you have to go to the higher up. By hosting, let's say, the boxing world championship, the athletics world championship, and 100,000 other more, under 17 World Cup for men, under 17 World Cup for women, we've held all this in the last 3 years. I'm not even joking. We have, right? We've held the Asian Cup. Asian Cup also we're thinking of hosting 2027. What are we achieving, right? What are we achieving by doing this? The answer is nothing. Okay. There is buzz around the tournament. There is buzz before the tournament, but then it's done. What after the tournament? Is there any program that's keeping up the legacy of this tournament up? It's not, right? So it's a very top to bottom approach, which I disagree with in sports. Sports in any country which is very successful starts at the bottom and then grows upwards. Instead, we're doing it the other way around, right? So, yeah, I mean, like that's all I have to say about that. Yeah.
I mean, that was very insightful as well. That at the bottom level, we have to do a lot of work in athletics. And you said they have to start, at the school level or something.
In any sport, not just athletics. Any sport is just a bottom-up effect only, right? Instead, these guys are treating it like a startup, saying, let's just put Series A funding, angel funding, seed funding to sport, and let's just try to blow it up like a balloon suddenly. It's not going to work like that. It's definitely not going to work. If I don't know, at the age of 18, if I don't know how to do a Rabona, Pep Guardiola can come and teach me. I'm still not going to do that Rabona, right?
True.
The thing is, anybody, Jose Mourinho can come and coach the Indian team today. But that lack of skill, even he can't make up for it. He's not Harry Potter. He can't magically do something, right? There is no quick fix to this. Any program, right? Germany's the biggest world experiment in the sporting world was Germany's revamp of its system from 1999, culminating in the triumph at 2014. And we're talking about a country which was already miles ahead of a lot of other countries in terms of culture, in terms of its stature in the footballing world. Germany, right? What pissed them off is that they finished at the bottom of the Euros. They had qualified for the Euros, right? Whereas a lot of countries don't even qualify. They qualified for the Euros. That is elite level ambition I'm talking about. Qualified for the Euros, finished last, got only a point in the group stage, and then they said, let's revamp the system, right? Because the old system is just not working for us anymore, right? Here we are just working on a 4-year cycle. We're just looking forward to the next Olympics. That's not going to work. You need Japan, for example, in 1994, came up with a 100-year plan of winning the World Cup. It's called Mission World Cup 2094. They plan to win the World Cup in 2094, which is why they have a 100-year plan in place. That's crazy. That's absolutely nuts, right? But that is the level of planning you need if you need to succeed. that and systematic sustained investment, right? India, if it does things only in a 4-year cycle, 5-year cycle, right? Then you're again starting from scratch at the end of cycle. That's not helping anybody. You need to make it a 20-year process. You need to make it a 30-year process, right? Another big example is Iceland, right? When Eidur Gudjohnsen played for Chelsea back in the 90s, they were nobodies. They weren't competitive at all, right? But then Iceland did root cause analysis. They said when it's cold, it's really difficult for us to play, right? So they came up with the concept of all weather pitches, right? Where they could just close the arena and play, right? But that's just a one part of solution, right? So today, Iceland became like the smallest country to qualify for the World Cup, right? That's a 20-year process. That didn't come overnight. That actually, like I said, like if anyone's telling you that, you know, in sports, your fortunes will change overnight, it's incorrect. It's not going to happen. It's at least 10, 20 years, which is why the baby leagues also be done. We have an agreement of 10 years with the local community saying we will run it for 10 years and you will not pull the plug on the program before 10 years. Because I cannot show results before that, to be very honest, right? Just for the heck of showing results, I can't show results, or for the heck of running a program, I can't run a namesake program. That has to be some tangibility to it, right? And I can only justify it after 10 years.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's been a long session, so I think we will have to stop here. I mean, it was nice to have you here. You know, hear all about those insights on where is India actually lacking in the sports world, and what is the next step that we have to do. You know, we have to actually lay a good bottom foundation. I'm happy the viewers have also got some, I hope the viewers have got some very good information from this as well. And if you really like our content, you know, do like the video. You can also comment on, you know, if there are some more things that you had to add up to it. And if you know more about Indian sports, please do comment on our channel. Please do share it with our friends. Subscribe to our channel. That's all from us. Arka, thanks for coming here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Until next time, stay safe.